Hill. I want to go to Dan Geltrude. You know what you don't know about Dan, besides being a smart stock market guy, he's an accountant. He knows numbers. I always think that should be a requirement going to Washington, just addition and subtraction, but that's neither here nor there. Dan, what do you make, first of all, if this were to ever come to light, these tax cuts? And again, Chad outlined just how big a hill that is to climb, but what do you think of it?
You know, Neil, what's really happening that is not getting a lot of attention, they're actually swapping two tax laws. The basis for doing this is to get rid of the employee retention tax credit, which was left over from COVID. Now, that program has been fraught with fraud, and everybody realizes it's not working. So really what's prompting this is to say, hey, let's get rid of that. And with the dollars we're going to save there, let's put in some other tax cuts that could make some sense. Now, the reason that the House, Neil, went down the path of doing this suspension tactic in terms of moving along with some speed, which then means that you have to have 60 votes in the Senate, is because they're actually going to try to make this retroactive into 2023. Now, can they pull that off? Well, there's two things at play. Can they get the votes in the Senate to get it through? And then will the IRS actually be able to put this in place in time? Because if they can't, Neil, all the politicians are not going to get the benefit of that in an election year.
You know, Dan, there's a separate story going on here about, reducing corporate taxes somewhat and some business expenses. It gets a little over my head. You're the accountant. I'll let you figure that out. But the one thing that intrigues me here, that's exactly what Donald Trump has been talking about and is hinting about if he were to resume the White House, and that he would push even bigger corporate taxes. I believe his were the biggest in American history. But what do you make of that, and can we overdo it in this age of deficits and debt? What do you think?
What will be interesting there, Neil, is that the Trump tax cuts, at least for individuals, are going to sunset in 2025. So right. No matter who the next president is, they're going to have to come up with some tax plan. Otherwise, everything goes back to the way it was. So certainly, if Donald Trump is the president and he's got a Republican House and Senate, there's no doubt in my mind that he's going to put through more tax cuts. He's certainly going to deal with the individuals because they're going to expire, and it would be likely that he's going to try to juice up the economy by giving tax cuts to corporations.
I am wondering, though, more and more of these Wall Street billionaires are coming out with warnings about debt, that, this could be the moment. Of course, it's been like waiting for Godot, something like this, that someone doesn't pay back their bills, and it could extend all the way to the United States government. I don't know if we're there, but what do you make of that, and that is the wild card we don't appreciate?
Well, Neil, listen, at 35 trillion and counting, and that number is just going to continue to rise, everybody's looking around and saying, at what point do we hit the end? And then what happens? No one knows. And it's interesting because every time tax cuts are proposed, what's the magic word? Oh, they're going to be paid for. It's all paid for.
Nothing is ever paid for.
It continues.
Neither spending nor cuts. They're never paid for. Yeah.
They're never paid for.
Right.
And the reason they're never paid for is because you have tax cuts and you have increase in spending, Neil. So the formula or the math, even for you, a non-accountant, it doesn't add up.
Well, I do know tax cuts do spur revenues. And the dirty little secret on the great success of Ronald Reagan is they spent those revenues and then some. Had they not done that, or at least cut back on that, as it was, it generated more than 20 million jobs. There's no denying how much it helped the economy in combination with Paul Volcker breaking the back of inflation. But that was a powerful 1-2 combo.
Yes, it was. And you know what, Neil, you're right, because if you look back as to when there are tax cuts, it does generate more revenue because you end up bringing more people into the fold, making more money to pay more tax. The problem always goes back to the spending never gets curtailed. All the little goodies keep going out to everybody so that the politicians get reelected. And that, in a nutshell, is what our problem is. As the saying goes, we don't have a revenue problem, we have a spending problem. Republican or Democrat, Neil.
All right. You're right about that, because it happens no matter who's running things. Dan Geltrude, great seeing you again, Dan. I appreciate it.
Thanks, Neil.
All right. In the meantime,